Hello and welcome back to History Today. We're your news reporters, Ilaria
and Agnell.
Today we have a special guest,
Christopher Columbus. And before we invite Christopher Columbus back onto the set, we must take a walk to the past.
And now we go back to the past.
Oh!
Whoa! That was the hard travel.
And here we are back with Christopher Columbus. Now we're going to take a look at Christopher Columbus' past and what had led him up to here. Hold this, Christopher.
Christopher Columbus made a great name for himself by discovering the land that was called the New World. But before this crucial event, he had a life that led up to it. Christopher Columbus was born in Genoa, Italy in 1451.
That would be around here.
His real name was actually Cristoforo Colombo. His parents were Domenico Colombo and Susanna Fontanarossa. He had 4 siblings and he was the eldest. This information is from history.com.
His father owned a weaving business and a cheese stand on the port of Genoa. Growing up, Christopher had many jobs. One of them was working at his father's cheese stand. Another was working for his father's weaving business. He also worked on a merchant ship. During his time working for the merchant ship, he voyaged to the Atlantic Ocean and almost lost his life. Wow, that must have been so hard for you, Christopher. The ship was attacked by French pirates off of the coast of Portugal. The ship burned and Christopher Columbus was forced to hold onto a straight plank and swim back to the Portuguese coast. After this horrible event, he traveled back to Lisbon, Portugal, and found himself a wife there. His wife was Philippa Perestrol, who birthed him a son named Diego. Philippa soon afterwards died, leaving Columbus with a young son. This information is from biography.com.
Columbus then moved to Spain, where he decided to live for the rest of his life. He found a woman named Beatriz Enriquez de Arana, and she eventually birthed him another son named Fernando. But he was born out of a wedlock. This means that Christopher and Beatriz never actually married, so the responsibility of raising Fernando fell on Christopher Columbus. But this didn't stop him from making war voyages to Africa. During these voyages, he found that Atlantic currents flow from the east to the west around the Canary Islands. This information is from kidsbotanica.com.
Now we're going to talk about what made Christopher want to discover the Americas, or so he thought. During this time when Christopher lived in Africa, he heard some talk around the town of a supposed route to Asia that, if found, would end up making him rich. And how exactly would that make him rich, you might ask? Well, that route led to a lot of cargoes of silk and spices. So with that information, Christopher already knew what he wanted to do. With his experience with exploring, he made a plan to get to Asia by sailing west. Asia is around here.
So sailing west would mean he would go this way.
Yep.
He would go west to like the Americas, but he didn't know it was the Americas yet. Yeah.
This was his plan because previously explorers had gone east around the coast of Africa to get to Asia. So previously explorers thought to go this way to get to Asia. And Christopher said, let's go this way. So his direct aim was actually not to go to the Americas or even find the Americas, but the reality to go to Asia. This information is from julesbergadvocate.com.
So now we're going to talk about how Ferdinand II and Isabella I helped Christopher Columbus find the Americas. Knowing that Christopher knew what he wanted to accomplish, all he needed was the platform. This unfortunately did not come easy to Christopher Columbus, as many of the countries he had asked already had something going on. For example, Portugal turned him down because they already had plans to go around the tip of Africa. This is around over here. They wanted to go to the tip of Africa.
So logically, they did not have the money to fund any other trip.
And on the other hand, Spain turned him down because they were in a war with Granada. As he kept staying constant and asking Spain, they finally responded with a yes and granted his proposal. Queen Isabella I and King Ferdinand II funded the whole journey for Christopher Columbus, which began on August 3rd, 1492. This information is from julesbergadvocate.com. Okay. Now we're going to talk about Christopher Columbus's journey. What people usually did to get to Asia was sail west, like around the West African coast, so like right here, to get to Asia, instead of, like, they just did that. And Christopher Columbus, he didn't like really understand this, because he thought that there was a way to just sail straight, like, across the Atlantic Ocean. So in continuation to what I just said before, we now know that he had some kind of right idea, but he was kind of wrong. He thought the Earth's circumference was much smaller than it actually is. His master plan was to sail from Europe to Asia using the Northwest Passage. So this is from like here to here. Like, he thought Asia was over here, and he thought like he could just sail across. As he was finalizing his plan, he presented it to many different officials of England and Portugal. None of them were very interested. The only people who gave him some attention were Ferdinand II and Isabella I of Spain. Again, this is in a continuation of what I said before. This information is from gilderlecherman.org. Both groups craved fame and fortune. Ferdinand II and Isabella I also wanted to spread Catholicism. Columbus was also Catholic, so the idea also intrigued him. Once they reviewed the plan and finalized everything, they made a contract with each other. Columbus would keep 10% of everything he found, and he would earn a noble title, and he would govern any land that he found.
He set out on his journey with 3 ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. Columbus planned to land in the West Indies, but ended up landing in the Palman Islands instead. The original goal was to look for pearls, precious stones, gold, silver, and spices, and other objects and merchandise whatsoever. He promised to give this to the Spanish, but he ended up not finding much. This information is from history.com.
Then, in January of 1493, Columbus left dozens of his own men in the land they called the Hispaniola to make a settlement. This is now called Haiti and the Dominican Republic, so it would be like around over here, like one of those islands. During his travels to the Americas, Columbus kept a detailed diary of his adventures. He wrote about the animals he saw, different types of terrain, and information about his travels. This includes things like the direction they were heading, the weather, and the distances they have traveled. He also wrote about the native people.
He wrote that they did not have any weapons and actually cut themselves on accident when handed one. He also wrote that they are scared, shy, honest, and easily defeated. He wanted to defeat them and their land, and so they can take them for slaves. They brought us parrots and balls of cotton and spears and many other things, which they exchanged for the glass beads and hawk bells, he wrote. They willingly traded everything they owned. They were well built with good bodies and handsome features. They do not bear arms and do not know them. For I showed them a sword, they took it by the edge and cut themselves out of ignorance. They have no iron, they would make fine servants. With 50 men, we could subject them all and make them do whatever we want. This was an excerpt from his journal. Talking about the native. When he returned to Spain, he gifted his journal to Isabella. When Columbus came back to Hispaniola 6 months later, he found it destroyed. He left the settlement, leaving them to fix with the part of his ship crew and hundreds of other enslaved indigenous people. This information is from Britannica.com. Moving on to the last segment we have with Christopher Columbus, my partner quickly took a bathroom break. We're going to answer the question, what impact did all his journeys have during his lifetime? Well, Christopher went on 4 journeys in his lifetime that made a great impact on exploration. His voyages revealed 2 continents and initiated a period of colonization, exploration, and exportation in the Americas. This excited the people of then. and had them wondering what was next. Unfortunately, not all his impacts were good. This was from VictoriaHut.com. When Christopher and his men made contact with the Native Americans, they extracted a germ called Sophis and brought it back to Europe. This is from the Gale website, Columbus and the Indians, made by Roseberry Theodore. The same also happened to the Native Americans when they extracted diseases from Christopher Columbus and his people. This took down a lot of Native Americans because they did not have the immunity against these diseases. Christopher and his crew also tortured a lot of the Native American people. When he saw the gold they had, because that's what they had come looking for. Christopher was also a slave trader, which again hurt the Native Americans as it had once made their population smaller and brought them trauma. This is from sites.uab.edu human/rights/Christopher Columbus. This just shows that Christopher had a lot of impacts during his lifetime, but not all of them are good. We usually mainly hear about the good ones all the time, but unfortunately that was not the case during his lifetime. Now that we have showed you a little bit of Christopher Columbus' past life, let's go back to the future. Bye, Christopher.
Whoa! And we're back to the present.
Now that we're reporting live from the studio, let's take a little recap of what we've learned and how that affects us in present day.
Christopher Columbus's voyages had many tremendous impacts on our world today. First of all, if he wouldn't have found this new world, people probably wouldn't have settled there the time that they did, and our country would be a totally different country than it is today. When Christopher Columbus died in 1506, he died still believing that he found a new and quicker route to the East Indies. He didn't think that he found a new world, he still thought he found a new and quicker route to Asia. His adventures inspired more explorers to go to the New World. As more people started discovering new places, people started making new settlements and establishing colonies. The Columbian Exchange was also started. The Columbian Exchange was a transfer of slaves, animals, food, and goods. It also spread diseases. And the spread of diseases, it caused the Black Plague, many plagues across the world. And this was caused because of the Columbian Exchange, and the Columbian Exchange was caused because of Christopher Columbus, so it's a conditional statement. He also encouraged the idea of enslaving the native people. This information is from rmg.co.uk.
The Native Americans were destroyed because Columbus wanted to get gold from them. He then tortured them to give them their gold. He tortured them by cutting off their hand, burning villages, and trading them in for slaves. These actions grew the popularity of slavery among the natives, and it grew racism.